The tension was unbearable as I stood outside the dilapidated warehouse. My breath fogged in the cold night air, the sharp sting of fear biting at my chest. I had crossed every line, and now there was no turning back. There was only one path forward, and it led straight into the heart of Victor's empire. I checked my phone one last time. Still no word from Ryan. The silence between us had become deafening, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what he had to say anymore. Whatever trust we had left was gone, shredded by lies and secrets. My eyes flickered over the dark windows of the warehouse, the faintest light flickering inside, hinting at the life that existed in the shadows. The night was thick with the promise of a confrontation. My palms were clammy, but I held my head high. Fear can paralyze you, or it can make you stronger, I told myself under my breath, a line I had repeated in the quiet of my mind over the last few hours. It was the only thing keeping me from turning around and running. I didn't have the luxury of fear anymore. The sound of a car pulling into the lot snapped my focus back to reality. I stepped back into the shadows, feeling the cold concrete press against my back. From the headlights, I could make out the outline of a tall figure, Victor, the man who had been controlling everything from the shadows, the man who had orchestrated all of this, the man who had stolen my life. He stepped out of the car slowly, his face illuminated for just a moment, before he ducked under the overhang and disappeared into the warehouse. My heart pounded. I was running out of time. I moved quickly, staying close to the walls, my footsteps almost silent. The door to the warehouse creaked as I pushed it open, the sound of the hinges making my stomach drop. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and rust, a stark contrast to the sleek, polished world I had once known. This was the world Victor had built, a world of darkness, deceit, and power. I crept deeper into the warehouse, my eyes scanning every corner. I couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Not now. I heard voices ahead, low murmurs, too faint to make out, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. One of the figures was Victor. The other was someone I hadn't expected, Ryan. I froze. They were standing by a large desk, talking in low, urgent voices. I could see Ryan's back turned to me, his posture stiff and tense, as if he were trying to hold it together, trying to convince himself that he was in control. Victor, on the other hand, had an air of calm about him, a confidence born of years spent operating in the shadows. He looked like a man who had nothing to lose. "This is the last time I'll ask you, Ryan." Victor's voice was smooth, calculating. "You can walk away. You can keep your hands clean. But you have to make the right choice now." Ryan shifted uneasily, but I could see it, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself back. He was torn. I could tell. I didn't have much time. I needed to act before they noticed me. "Victor, Ryan started, but I couldn't let him finish. I stepped forward, my heels clicking loudly against the concrete floor. "Victor," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension in the air. "It's over." Both men froze. Ryan turned toward me, his eyes widening in shock, then quickly hardening as realization dawned on him. Victor, however, was calm, too calm. He smiled faintly, as if he had been expecting me. "You're still here, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I must admit I'm impressed. Most people would have run by now." I stood my ground. "You don't scare me anymore, Victor. You've lied and manipulated everyone around you, but it ends tonight." Victor's smile faltered just for a second before he regained his composure. "You have no idea what you're up against. You're not in control of this, Maya. You never were." I didn't flinch. I don't need to be in control. I just need to expose the truth. I pulled out the envelope Charlotte had given me. I held it up, letting the contents spill onto the floor in front of him. Documents, photos, records of illegal transfers, enough to bring down his empire. Victor's expression twisted with rage. "You think this means anything?" Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I stepped closer, my heart racing. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And it's over. Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered, and I heard the distinct sound of footsteps approaching. Another set of figures emerged from the shadows. My blood ran cold as I realized who they were, Victor's men. I backed up, my pulse quickening. The escape routes were limited. I was cornered, but I wasn't about to let them take me down. I turned and bolted, sprinting toward the back exit. But as I reached the door, the sound of heavy footsteps thundered behind me, closing in fast. In that moment, everything slowed. I felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I turned, my body slamming into the door, pushing it open. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running. I couldn't stop. The weight of everything was pushing me forward. The stakes were higher than ever. If I didn't get to the authorities with the evidence, if I didn't expose Victor and his empire, everything I had risked would be for nothing. I ran until I could no longer hear the pursuit. Hours later, in the safety of a secure location, I sat at a desk, the papers spread in front of me. My hands were still shaking, but I knew what I had to do. I dialed the number. "It's time," I said, my voice firm. "I have everything you need." As the phone call ended, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The fight was far from over, but I had won this round. The truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deep the lies went. And now, finally, I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the secrets. I had taken back control, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. Charlotte's hand was shaking when she slid the manila envelope across the table to me. I couldn't even bring myself to open it. My pulse was pounding too loudly in my ears, drowning out the world around me. Outside, the city hummed, but inside this dingy cafe, it felt like the walls were closing in. I stared at the envelope, the weight of it pressing down on me. The silence between us stretched thin, broken only by the clink of a spoon against a cup. "This is everything, Maya," Charlotte whispered, her voice strained. "It's not just your husband. It's not just Diane. This is bigger than anything I ever imagined." I swallowed hard and reached for the envelope, my hands numb as I peeled it open. Inside, there were documents, pictures, too many to digest in one glance. But I saw the key pieces right away. Bank transfers, forged signatures, confidential reports, all linked to Victor, the man I thought was dead. "Victor," I said aloud, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "He's alive. He's the one behind all of this." Charlotte nodded, her eyes avoiding mine. "He faked his death years ago. Diane helped him cover it up. And Ryan, he was in on it from the beginning." I didn't know what to say. The foundation of my entire life felt like it was crumbling beneath me. So Ryan really didn't know? I asked, my voice trembling. How could he be involved in something like this without telling me? Charlotte shook her head. He knew. He just didn't know the full extent. Victor kept him in the dark, making him believe it was all about protecting the family. But it's never been about family. It's about power. Control. I leaned back in the booth, my breath catching in my throat. I was suffocating. I had been married to a man who had been living a lie, and I had been blind to it. How do I stop this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Charlotte hesitated for a moment, then looked at me with eyes that seemed to have aged 10 years in the span of a few minutes. The only way to stop them is to expose Victor. He's the key. He's the one who's been pulling the strings all along, using Diane to cover up his empire. If we can bring him down, the whole thing will collapse. I didn't know if I could believe her. There was so much to untangle, so much at risk. But I knew one thing for sure. I was already in too deep to back out now. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking as I slid them back into the envelope. Where do I find him? I asked, trying to steady myself. Charlotte's eyes darted nervously toward the door. That's the problem, Maya. He's already onto you. He's been watching you. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating every ounce of hope I had left. But I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. If Charlotte was right, this was my chance to end it all, to bring everything to light. But that meant taking on Victor and everything he had. The night was cold as I walked to my car, the weight of the envelope in my hand heavier than ever. I tried not to look over my shoulder, but I couldn't help it. The feeling that someone was following me, waiting for me to slip up, was suffocating. It was like a shadow was lingering just out of sight, watching my every move. I started the engine, but before I could pull out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up, hoping for a clue, a break in this mess. Maya, the voice on the other end said, smooth and cold. I hear you've been asking questions. You should have known better. My blood ran cold. It was Victor. The line clicked and the call ended. My hands were shaking as I stared at the phone, the glow from the screen blurring in my vision. Shit, I muttered under my breath, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. I had no time to waste. They were closing in. Every step I took seemed to lead me closer to the edge of a cliff, and now I could feel the pull of the fall. I drove fast, my hands clenched tight on the wheel. I needed to make it to the safe house Charlotte had mentioned, the one place where I might be able to hide long enough to figure out my next move. The city lights blurred past me as I drove, each turn feeling like a countdown to something I couldn't escape. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching snapped me out of my thoughts. I jerked the wheel to the left as a black SUV swerved in front of me, blocking the road. My heart pounded in my chest. They had found me. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, trying to speed around the SUV, but it was too fast. The SUV matched my speed, keeping me trapped in the middle of the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Another car, two more, were coming up behind me. It's a trap. My mind raced as I swerved left again, narrowly avoiding a collision. But the SUVs were relentless, closing in on me like a pack of wolves. I had to act fast. The side road ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for my car to fit. It was risky, but it was my only option. I slammed the brakes and turned the wheel hard. The car skidded sideways, tires screeching as I cut across the road, narrowly avoiding the approaching vehicles. My pulse was racing as I sped down the narrow alley, the noise of the engines behind me growing louder. I had seconds to decide, keep running or confront them. I chose to run. The alley was dark, barely lit by the dim streetlights overhead. I pushed the car to its limits, praying I could shake them off. But the cars kept following, inching closer with every turn. My breath was heavy in my chest, panic bubbling up as the realization hit me. They won't stop until they've caught me. I needed help, but it was too late to turn back now. The black SUV stayed right behind me, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror, pushing the anxiety building in my chest to the edge. I could feel the cold sweat forming on the back of my neck as I sped down the narrow streets. They were watching me. I didn't need to look to know they were there. Everything about the way they followed me screamed danger. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles turning white. I had to get to Charlotte. She was the only one who knew more than I did. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was too far in to turn back now. The cafe where we had agreed to meet was nearly empty, save for a few quiet figures scattered at the corners of the room. Charlotte was already there, sitting at a small table in the farthest corner. Her hands were trembling slightly as she traced a coffee cup. The shadow of fear was etched deep into her features. When I slid into the seat across from her, she didn't look up at first. She was lost in thought, distracted, almost as if she were trying to ignore the elephant in the room. But when her eyes met mine, the air between us grew thick with unspoken tension. "I'm being followed, Charlotte," I said, my voice tight with the weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours. "I don't know how much longer I have before they get to me. What the hell is going on?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before leaning in, lowering her voice. It's not just you, Maya. Diane's network isn't just after the house. They're after you. Everything you have. They've been building an empire, and you've become a liability. I felt the ground beneath me shift. Liability? Ryan. I swallowed hard. He knew. All this time he knew about Diane. He signed the damn papers without telling me. How could he do that? Charlotte's eyes flickered. There was something there, something I hadn't noticed before, something that didn't sit right. She shifted, looking uncomfortable. It's more than just him, Maya. Ryan isn't the one calling the shots. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Then who is? Charlotte hesitated, glancing at the door, then back at me. She looked like she was battling something inside herself, like there was more she was keeping from me. I leaned in. Tell me. I need to know. Her breath caught as she met my gaze. Maya, the truth is, Ryan's not just in debt. His father, he's not dead. Not the way Diane told you. He's been alive this whole time, pulling the strings from the shadows. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. This couldn't be happening. Ryan's father, dead. No, Diane had told me that story so many times. That was supposed to be the truth. What do you mean, alive? How is that even possible? I stammered, trying to process the weight of her words. Why would Ryan keep this from me? Charlotte's eyes were locked on mine, her voice barely above a whisper. Because his father, Victor, is the one behind all of this. He's been controlling everything for years, even when you thought he was dead. Ryan, he was always just a pawn in his game. I was reeling, trying to steady my breath. That's impossible. Why would Diane keep him hidden? And why would Ryan never tell me? Because, Charlotte continued, Victor has too much power. If Ryan told you the truth, you'd be dragged into a mess bigger than anything you could ever imagine. You're not just dealing with a family dispute, Maya. You're dealing with organized crime. I recoiled, the words hitting me like a slap. What kind of crime? What are you talking about? Charlotte took a deep breath. Victor isn't just hiding behind the scenes. He's running everything. Diane was just a figurehead, a way for him to protect his empire. They've been laundering money for years, using the real estate market, offshore accounts, and people like Ryan to keep things clean. The sale of your house, that's just a small piece of it. Ryan, I whispered, my heart pounding. My God, what have I married into? Charlotte leaned in closer, her eyes wide with fear. I don't think Ryan even knows how deep he's in, but it's bad. Too bad. And now they've decided to silence anyone who gets too close. You're too close, Maya. The words hung in the air, suffocating. My head was spinning. Everything I thought I knew suddenly slipping out of my grasp. I had spent years living a lie, believing in a marriage, a family that wasn't real. And now I was trapped. I pushed back from the table, suddenly too dizzy to sit still. What do I do now? How do I stop this? Charlotte stood too, her face pale. You have to expose them, Maya. Take everything you know to the authorities. But you have to be careful. Diane and Victor, they won't hesitate to come after you. As if on cue, the lights flickered above us. My heart skipped. A sense of dread washed over me. The shadow of a figure passed by the window, barely noticeable, but enough to make my pulse race. I glanced out through the blinds, but there was nothing there. You're being watched, Charlotte said quietly, her voice sharp. It's not just paranoia. You can't trust anyone right now. I didn't respond. The fear in her voice was too real. There was nowhere I could run. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers shaking. The message was from an unknown number. We're not done with you yet. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. My heart dropped. This was just the beginning. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my mind racing. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Charlotte, I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. Where do I go from here? She didn't answer right away. She just gave me a long, worried look before finally nodding toward the door. I'll take you to someone who can help. But we have to hurry. They're already too close. I followed her, knowing that if I didn't act fast, everything would slip through my fingers, and I would have no one to blame but myself. The air in the parking garage was thick, suffocating even. I stood there, gripping my phone with trembling fingers, staring at the unread text from Charlotte. I had barely processed her warning before she disappeared into the shadows. It was almost too much to absorb. They've been lying to me for years, I thought. Ryan, Diane, the house, everything. The truth had cracked open like a dam, but the water flooding in was too much. I needed answers. But what was I supposed to do with them once I had them? The parking garage felt like a trap. Every echo of my footsteps bounced back at me, loud and foreboding. I glanced over my shoulder. Was someone following me? I couldn't tell. The silence was unsettling, the type of silence that screams someone's watching. But when I spun around, no one was there. I exhaled, forcing myself to focus. I had to meet Charlotte. I had to know more. She had hinted at something bigger, something far worse than I'd anticipated. The money laundering was just the surface. She said there were people involved who had connections to dangerous organizations, people who didn't just play with power, they owned it. And for some reason, Diane was the key. I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat, trying to shake the paranoia creeping up my spine. I could feel the tension growing tighter by the second. Every movement, every decision felt like it carried more weight now. I wasn't just fighting for a home, I was fighting for my life. I pulled up to the cafe where Charlotte had agreed to meet me. It was dark, almost too dark, the lights overhead casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I spotted her immediately, standing in the far corner, looking more out of place than I had ever seen her. She was shifting nervously, glancing at the street, as though she was waiting for someone to jump out from the shadows. I approached cautiously, my steps heavy with suspicion. As I walked up, she didn't smile. She barely even acknowledged me before sliding into the booth. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Maya, she said, voice tight low. I wish I could tell you this was over, but it's not. This is just the beginning. I didn't sit. I just stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. What are you talking about? You said you had information. What is it? Charlotte hesitated, glancing over her shoulder again. I've been watching Diane for a while now. She's been involved in something bigger than you can imagine. The house, it's not about money. It's about control, Maya. She's playing a game with people who don't play by the rules. I leaned in, trying to make sense of her words. I already know about the money. I know about the sale. But what are you talking about, control? Who is she working for? Charlotte's eyes flickered nervously. She's not just laundering money. She's moving people. People who are untouchable. And I think your husband has been involved in it all along. I froze. Ryan. Charlotte nodded. He's been used, Maya. He doesn't even know the full extent of it. But Diane has something over him. Something dangerous. She dropped her voice lower, almost a whisper. Ryan's involvement isn't just about the money. There's blood on his hands. The words hit me like a punch. I couldn't breathe for a moment, my chest constricting. Blood? I was starting to see it all now, the strange late-night meetings, the evasive behavior, the lies. But why? I asked, my voice strained. Why would he do that? Why didn't he tell me anything? Charlotte's eyes were filled with something I hadn't expected, pity, maybe even sorrow. Because, Maya, you weren't supposed to know. Diane didn't want you to find out. She wanted to keep you in the dark, under control. And now that you've started digging, she'll do anything to keep you quiet. She doesn't care if you're married to her son. She'll destroy you just like she's destroyed everyone else. I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. Where is Ryan now? I demanded. unable to hold back the anger rising in my chest. Charlotte shook her head. I don't know, but if you want to find him, you need to go deeper. You need to get to the people Diane's working with, the ones who really pull the strings. I turned and walked away, my mind racing. Deeper? I didn't know what that meant, but I knew one thing for sure. I was already in way over my head, and there was no turning back. The walk back to my car was quicker than I had intended. Every step felt like I was moving through quicksand. My mind kept racing. Diane, Ryan, the house, the offshore accounts, it was all tangled, all connected. And somewhere at the center of it was me. I slid into the driver's seat, staring at my hands gripping the wheel. There was no time to lose. I had to find out who these people were, what they were hiding, and what Ryan had gotten himself mixed up in. Because if I didn't figure it out soon, I knew I was going to lose everything. My phone buzzed again, cutting through the fog in my brain. Another text from Ryan. You don't know everything, Maya. I'm sorry. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. Suddenly, the headlights of a car flashed in my rearview mirror. A black SUV. I held my breath as the car pulled up beside me. They're watching me. My heart skipped a beat as the SUV slowed to a stop next to my car. I turned the key in the ignition, my hand shaking. Was this it? Was I about to be silenced? The window of the SUV rolled down. I couldn't see the driver's face, but the voice that came through the window was chilling. We know you're asking questions, Maya. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I sat at the kitchen table, the phone still warm in my hand, staring at the text from Diane. You were never his blood. You should have known better. The words burned into my mind like a brand, pulling me deeper into a storm I couldn't control. What did she mean by that? The house was just the beginning, wasn't it? I needed answers. But where did I even start? Ryan had gone dark. No texts, no calls, nothing. I was alone. More than that, I was out of the loop. The moment the house was sold, I became irrelevant, disposable. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. The aroma of fresh coffee lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the tightening feeling in my chest. My pulse drummed in my ears. The unsettling feeling in my gut hadn't left. Something was off. Something more than just betrayal. I had no idea how deep the hole went. I pulled up the email again, the one that had destroyed my calm. Property sold. $2.8 million. It had been signed off on by both Ryan and Diane, and yet my signature, my real signature, was nowhere to be found. My hands shook as I opened the document again. The contract was in front of me, but I knew better now. That's not my name. I grabbed my phone and dialed the real estate agency. Hello, this is Maya Harris. I have a few questions about the recent property sale. My voice felt strange, like it wasn't my own. The woman on the other end was polite, almost too polite. Yes, Mrs. Harris, how can I help? I took a breath. I was under the impression that my consent was required for the sale of the property. Can you walk me through the contract process? There was a long pause, just enough to make my stomach drop. Then, the woman's voice came back, slightly shaky. I'm afraid the sale was finalized weeks ago, ma'am. Everything was in order. All the signatures were processed without issue. Without issue. I didn't trust the tone in her voice, the hesitation. Something was wrong, but I couldn't place it. I hung up quickly and sank back into my chair. The silence in the room pressed down on me. I needed to know more. This wasn't just a real estate deal gone bad. This was a family betrayal disguised as paperwork. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I was going to find out exactly who had been pulling the strings. It wasn't just Diane. No, Ryan had to be in on it, and I was done being left in the dark. The drive to the office felt like an eternity. The streets blurred past me as I tried to steady my breath. What was I even going to say to Ryan when I found him? The thought of confronting him sent a shockwave of anger through me. How had he kept me in the dark about this? It wasn't just about money, it was about trust. I parked outside the building, staring at the glass doors. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by an all-too-familiar face. Charlotte, an old friend of Ryan's. She was standing near the elevator, clutching her phone, her face tight with worry. She looked up as I approached, and for a split second, our eyes locked. She looked like she wanted to speak, but hesitated. I stepped closer. "Charlotte," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "I need your help." She gave a nervous laugh. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this, Maya. It's complicated." "Complicated? I'm not here for small talk." I could feel the frustration bubbling up. "I need to know everything. About Ryan. About Diane. About this whole damn sale." She shifted uncomfortably, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "Listen, Maya, this is bigger than you think. I don't have time for this." I could feel the walls closing in. "What do you mean, bigger?" Charlotte stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Diane didn't just sell the house. She's been setting something up. Something dangerous. I've been watching her for a while now. There's a lot more at stake than just the property." My heart rate kicked up. "What kind of dangerous?" "I can't explain it all here," she said, stepping back. "But if you really want to know, meet me tonight. You have to trust me on this." She turned, walking quickly toward the elevator, disappearing inside before I could say another word. I stood frozen for a moment, her words ringing in my ears. "You have to trust me on this." I didn't know if I could trust her, but right now she was my only lead. I had no choice but to follow her. Later that night, I found myself in an empty parking garage, the distant hum of traffic barely audible over my racing heart. Charlotte was already there, standing next to a black car, her face pale. As I approached, I saw her hand shaking slightly. She was nervous, but not for the reason I expected. "Maya, you don't know what you're about to get into." I took a deep breath, swallowing down the fear that threatened to bubble up. "Tell me everything." Charlotte opened the car door and slid in. I followed her, and as I buckled my seatbelt, she started speaking in low tones, the words spilling out like poison. "The house wasn't just sold to pay off debts. Diane has been funneling money for years, laundering it through offshore accounts. But it's not just about money, Maya. It's about control. She's been using Ryan as a pawn, and now she's pulling the strings to make sure you don't get in her way." The weight of her words hit me like a truck. Diane had been playing a game with me for years, using Ryan and our marriage to protect her dirty secrets. But the game was about to end. Ryan. He knew, didn't he? My voice cracked as the reality set in. Charlotte's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "He did. But there's more, Maya. There's always more." I stared at her, waiting for the next bombshell to drop. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just Diane. There's someone else pulling the strings. Someone you never expected." My blood ran cold. "I'm Maya, 38, married to Ryan for over a decade. We live in a house many would call a dream, a mansion nestled in Beverly Hills, a life painted with luxury and apparent perfection. To the outside world, we were the epitome of success, the couple everyone envied. But beneath the surface, things were different. I never quite belonged. Diane, my mother-in-law, made sure of that. The carefully crafted picture of a perfect family felt more like a gilded cage. Ryan's loyalty, his eyes always on her approval, was enough to make me feel like an outsider, an interloper in my own marriage. I should have been grateful. I should have been content with our wealth, with the life we built. But I wasn't. The truth is, I felt suffocated, constantly walking on eggshells. Diane's sharp glances, her subtle manipulations, and Ryan's constant need to please her, it all chipped away at my peace. I came home that afternoon expecting a quiet evening, maybe a glass of wine. But I didn't expect the notification that popped up on my phone. Property sold. $2.8 million. I blinked. It couldn't be. The house, our house, had been sold. without my knowledge, without my consent. I immediately called Ryan. The phone rang endlessly before going to voicemail. Frustrated, I dialed Diane, certain that she would have some explanation. But her voicemail message was all I needed to hear. I felt my stomach drop. Something was terribly wrong. The feeling in my gut told me this wasn't just about the sale of a house. It was about something much bigger. I found myself standing there, staring at the screen, as the realization sank in. They sold it. They sold everything. The house wasn't just a house. It was everything that kept me anchored to a life I thought I understood. And now it was gone. My name wasn't even on the contract. I should have been the first to know. But it was worse than that. The signature on the sale papers wasn't mine. And that's when the truth hit me like a freight train. Ryan had signed it all. And somewhere in that twisted web, so had Diane. My own mother-in-law had betrayed me, but not just in business. No, this betrayal was deeper, darker, more dangerous than I ever imagined. They weren't just after my house. They were after my entire life. The silence in the house was deafening. And just when I thought I couldn't feel more alone, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Diane. You were never his blood. You should have known better. Everything I thought I knew had just shattered. And now I was trapped in a game where the rules kept changing and the stakes kept getting higher.